Beyond Vizcaya is a production of Vizcaya Museum and Gardens in association with our community partners. Together, we're building a legacy of story sharing that honors Miami's past, illuminates its present, and safeguards its future.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. Here we are in our third season, second episode of Beyond Vizcaya, and we're largely talking about LGBTQ studies and stories and how we help share those stories here in Vizcaya and beyond. My name is Julio Capo, and I'm a historian at Florida International University and Vizcaya's scholar in residence. And we are here at Vizcaya's historic garage, where we have spent the last few hours having really powerful discussions, robust discussions about how we preserve and tell the histories of people who have historically been marginalized from so many different spaces, historic sites, museums. Vizcaya is really dedicated and invested in talking about these kinds of questions. And today we had this incredible LGBTQ think tank where we talked about all these questions together, some of the issues that it raises. And among those people, I'm here with three fabulous folks who I care very deeply about. Among the three who were part of the LGBTQ think tank today, Bachin, Joseph Zolobczuk, and Sarah Pawlicki. I thought we'd begin by just kind of introducing ourselves. Robin?
Sure, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be part of this conversation. I'm Robin Bachin. I am a historian of American cities and the environment. And I also run the University of Miami's Office of Civic and Community Engagement. So I'm very much invested in how we use history and scholarship to connect to a wide variety of publics, and how the stories of historic sites like Vizcaya resonate with different audiences. So just so thrilled to be in conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Joseph.
Yes, so again, also thank you for having me here. It was an honor and privilege to participate today. So a little bit about myself. So I represent the Yes Institute. We're a community-based nonprofit organization that is dedicated to preventing suicide and ensuring the healthy development of young people, particularly when the topics of gender and orientation might be in the mix with their family or their loved ones.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joseph, for all the work you do. Sarah.
Hello, my name is Sarah Pawlicki. I'm a postdoctoral fellow working with the National Historic Landmarks Program on their Expanding Women's History initiative. And LGBT history was an essential part of my dissertation and continues to be part of my public history, public humanities work moving forward.
Thank you, Sarah. You're all doing such meaningful and important community-based work and talking about how important these stories are. I wonder, so I thought for today's episode, and thank you for all joining us for this critical conversation, such a big part of this is really engagement with, there's so many different ways that we could approach this, right? That is that we need feedback and we want your feedback to think about how we deal with these kind of big questions. This is not meant to be a closed conversation, right? And I thought maybe we could share some of the questions that we addressed today in our think tank with everyone else. Maybe we could begin by what are some of the challenges of, when we do LGBTQ history in historic sites like Vizcaya, what are some of the challenges in telling those stories that have historically been marginalized, but of course also they're difficult to tell, like what evidence exists, all these kinds of things. If one of you can start by kind of getting us there.
Well, I'll jump in. I think one of the difficulties is about the archive, right? There are a lot of gaps and silences in the archives. We often don't have written material from people who were laborers at a site, people who might have had identities that weren't represented or openly discussed at the time, which today we might call LGBTQ, but in the past might be referred to in different ways. And so I think oftentimes it means we need to really think critically about how we read sources. So having a lens that is much more inclusive about whose stories we want to tell, how can those stories be told, what kinds of sources do we need to look for in order to tell those stories, and then being really careful about how we weave those stories into a larger narrative of history.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Sign me up. How about you?
So one of the things that I started to think about today, and it relates to the conversation of there was different concepts about gender and orientation. We talk about these things very differently today. We have more vocabulary,
Yeah.
but also like not trying to put sort of our 2024 lens onto something and not appreciating the historical period.
Yeah.
Like many of the historical figures we discussed today, we could definitely say, these are people who, even for their time period, fell outside of the typical masculine, feminine gender expectations.
Great
like Deering's secretary,
Althea Altimus.
yeah, like had to hide, that she was married, so she had to say her husband deceased. And so that definitely was like sort of a theme that we can also acknowledge, which is sort of also adjacent to LGBT history, right? Because many people, even still today, struggle with gender expectations. So that's something that we can appreciate about looking at these conversations.
What a great point that is to kind of contextualize it in changes about gender and sexuality at large, right? That is to understand, that ideas, gender norms have also changed and put it in these kind of historical contexts, right? Like folks in the audience might also be familiar with Paul Shalfin, for example, but one of the main visionaries of course, Vizcaya, who we can really associate as being openly gay in a kind of period that was almost unheard of. But there's so many other stories about gender and sexuality that we still have left to tell, right? That are so critical. Sarah, do you have anything that you wanted to say about?
I think the importance of inviting people to be curious about history and about, as you said, the way people identified in the past is not necessarily the way they would identify today, or the way we would identify them today. But to appreciate that, like the nuance and the specificity and the uniqueness of queer identity is the same in the past as it is today, and to tap into that curiosity about queer history, both a challenge and an opportunity.
Talking LGBTQ history is my jam. Like that is like, this makes me happy to have these kind of critical conversations, and I'm just grateful for all of it, and hope that you all can continue joining us as we move forward. It goes without saying, one of the most important parts of this kind of work is to talk also about what's at stake. Like that is like, why is this work so important? Like why is it that we need to talk about historic sites like Vizcaya and be inclusive of marginalized stories like LGBTQ folks and phenomena?
Yeah, I mean, I think it captures, what we've been doing as scholars and historians over the last 50 years, right? Who is it that makes history? Everyone makes history. So Vizcaya wasn't just dropped down here. People built this place. It is situated in Miami, within the larger world of the Caribbean. We know that many of the laborers who built Vizcaya came from the Bahamas, and they used their artisanal skills that they brought from the Bahamas to shape Vizcaya. So while we typically think of a historic house museum like Vizcaya as having these old world connections, right? The various rooms that were literally brought over here from France or from Italy, it had to actually be built. And so when we think about the landscape design by somebody from Colombia, or the actual building of the site, there were so many people who are part of the larger story of Miami's history, of migration, of race, of segregation, of different notions about sexuality, gender identity, how one expressed that in the early 20th century. Those stories are all incorporated here. And what an amazing opportunity to tell this really rich narrative of Miami history and American history.
Give me goosebumps. Yes. How about anything you want to add?
So at a very sort of pragmatic level, in the last couple of years, some of the families that we work with, and from the young people directly, so I'm talking like high school, college age youth.
At Yes Institute.
Yeah, through Yes Institute or families that we work with, they started to share that they saw like a lot of negative posting just about LGBT representation or inclusion in general. And some of our youth even started to report like severe mental health distress because it feels like I open my Instagram and I feel like everybody is arguing about me and fighting about me versus I'm just trying to be a teenager and figure out, do I want to go to college and how can I afford that? Like, and so when we get to share with young people about like the history and also people who have been sort of marginalized in society and how they found resiliency and they push forward anyway, it actually can kind of, it has actually, like we've seen, I don't want to make the direct connection, but it supports the mental health well-being of our young people and also our families who don't feel like they're often included in just mainstream conversations and representation.
Well said, and I mean, I know I said it already, but thank you so much for the work you're doing. You're doing life-affirming work. Thank you. Anything you want to add, Sarah?
Well, I can echo that by saying that as a teenager, I discovered that queer identity was a thing that I, in fact, shared by reading queer history.
Wow.
It was very randomly in an antique store in West Virginia, picking up a biography of Montgomery Clift and being like, oh my goodness. So yes, you find yourself, you find a sense of precedence, a sense of possibility, and I think that is what is so hugely important. And also, in the broader landscape of education generally, this is so important for queer youth, but it's important for everyone to see that that there are all of these possibilities. There are all of these different ways to be in the world today and historically, and so many of those can be represented here at Vizcaya.
Oof, thanks for sharing that, Sarah. I had a similar experience, and it's to kind of when you first read a gay history book and you're like, I can imagine if I was living in X period or whatever, how I might have, and then to also imagine that someone might be looking at your life 100 years from now and that like what that would look like. It's a powerful, to be seen and to be heard and to give life in all of its textures and all of its depth and with dignity and respect. It's such a heavy but necessary task. I guess that, as I kind of think about all these points together, how do you think folks who are listening, who are watching this, how can they get involved? Like, what's the way that people can engage in LGBTQ history locally at Vizcaya, beyond? What are some of the kind of advice that you might give them and to kind of be in community, to have these kinds of conversations that we're having right now?
Well, some things that we can do is like look at the history.
Yeah.
There are so many amazing books, and there are more being published. A lot of your work also is included in that. So if people like research and history, there's a lot of opportunities to like contribute to the conversation. So that's one way.
Not be silent and then to be engaged. Yeah. Thanks, Rich.
And also just, Vizcaya's history with the white party that we were talking about earlier, which, as we were learning from your research that you've been doing here, that, this white party was really kind of mutual aid, as you termed it, right? It was a place to come together for community support during the AIDS crisis. And it's become an international phenomenon, right? Where it's a destination. People want to come here. So to see Vizcaya as a site for kind of gay history, gay joy, gay pride, and gay comfort and care, right? To just really frame how we understand Vizcaya, not just from the time that James Deering was living here, but up until the present day.
Yeah, well said. Anything you want to add? It's okay if you don't.
Just the echo. It's a site of solidarity.
I love that.
And practicing solidarity in a space that is characterized by really some extreme disparities, to be able to reinfuse the space with the spirit of solidarity is such a beautiful thing.
I love, and in this conversation and the one we held earlier today as part of the broader think tank, several people kept nodding too to like speaking to your elders, right? Like that is like the institutional knowledge that folks have, right? And like, and as we talk about things like the White Party, for example, how many folks didn't get a chance to tell their story, right? And when we are tasked with it's almost like an evasion of our task to not tell their stories and not kind of do right by them when they weren't given the same chance to speak, right, in the kind of same platform. Y'all, like this is just a small preview of the conversation we had earlier today. The themes are largely about stories of resistance and resilience. How can we tell LGBTQ stories in spaces like Vizcaya in ways that are mindful of and respectful of the historical record or accurate, but are also really mindful of where we are today. That is like to respond to people's questions of the day. So people can, like all these points are just so important. They can be life affirming, they can be to be seen and to be heard and to be unsilenced, right? And is such a key and necessary move. As we wrap up, I just want to thank each and every one of you for contributing to today's think tank and for being a part of Beyond Vizcaya and everyone else who was involved. There's other folks who were part of the think tank who couldn't join us for today's session, but it was powerful, it's meaningful, and we need your help to kind of please send us your feedback, your thoughts, and for ways that we can continue doing this work moving forward. Vizcaya is committed to doing so, and so are we. So thank you all for joining us, and take good care.